Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alec Reed. This is my channel, Alec Reads, and today we're reading Wheelchair Accessible, Chapter 13. I am so excited, and I hope that you're excited too. Again, I have a heater going because it's cold here by like a lot. So if that is annoying, I'm sorry. If I turn it off, I will lose toes. But anyway, also, I did say the wrong Instagram. It is not just Alec_Reads. It is Alec_Reads 123. I forgot the numbers last time. I'm really sorry. Anyway, but it's okay. We'll get it figured. We'll get it figured out. But anyway, let's jump right into the video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below whether it's leaving recommendations or whether it's just saying hello, because I will respond to both. And let's jump right in. Part 13. Nice practice, boys. Coach barked as we all circled around him, huffing and panting after a hard practice. We've got a big game next week, so I don't want to hear anyone going to parties this weekend. You got it? Zero tolerance on that. I'm serious. Your body needs to be in top form. Yes, coach. The team chorused back. All right, hit the showers. Feeling a burning at the back of my neck, I fake stretched just so I could peek a glance over my shoulder. My eyes met Will's almost instantly, and he smirked before I could turn away. I could already imagine the plan formulating in his head, something incriminating that would really push Coach over the edge. Anything to get me off the team. As usual, I hung back, but my fingers fiddled with the zipper of my bag more than usual. I'd been thinking a lot lately. Shauna had been filling my head with her words about starting over and not letting my past define me, and it had inspired me to do something about it. I wasn't happy with the way things were, but it didn't have to stay that way. I could do something about it, and it was going to. I just had to work up the nerve to actually... You done staring, Harris? I jumped at Coach's voice. Yeah, sorry, I swallowed, wondering why the words are suddenly so hard to get out. Talk. He walked as though he'd been waiting for it, but I wasn't about to tell him about my troubles with the guys. Coach was a good guy, but it wasn't like we were buddies. Go ahead. He nodded, busy jolting something down on his clipboard. I coughed to clear my throat. I want to quit the team. My words caused his attention to snap up. What was that? I don't want to play on the team anymore, Coach. Coach gave me a look over. If this is because of Graham and the others, so he did suspect something was going on. I considered blurting it all out right there, telling him the whole truth, but I didn't want to be that guy. As much as I disliked Will, the idea of ruining his last football season didn't sit well with me. He was a good player, honestly, and getting him kicked off the team, which I'm sure Coach would do if he knew about everything, would only make the whole team suffer. Even though I'd make him hurt for everything he's done to me, I knew that ultimately it wasn't the right thing to do. I needed to choose to be a better person, and besides, this wasn't even about him. No, Coach, this is for me. He lifted an eyebrow. Are you sure, Mark? I'm sure. This isn't what I want for myself right now. I hope you don't mind. Coach looked troubled, like he knew there was more to the story, but also didn't want to get involved. Eventually, he let out a heavy sigh. You're my best middle linebacker. I smiled. Lee has a lot of potential, though. He rubbed his head. How's about this? You stay until after the big game against the Bobcats, and then you can go. Give yourself some time to change your mind. I guess I can do that. Great. He nodded, and then, as though he didn't know any other way to end the conversation, with his players, he added, Now, hit the showers. Thanks, Coach. I left the field and headed for the locker room. Feeling like a 50-pound weight had been lifted off my shoulders, I only needed to stay for a couple more weeks and then I was free. It wasn't a completely fresh start, but it was a beginning of a new beginning, and it felt really good. Stepping into the changing room, I immediately felt the pressure of a dozen eyes on me. I usually hated when people stared at me, especially people from school, but it was like that signal in my brain had been turned off. I didn't care anymore. The hold they used to have on me was gone. "Aw, look who showed up, boys." Will laughed mockingly, rubbing a towel over his head. "Harris finally man enough to shower with the rest of us." I held back an eye roll and silently moved from my locker. Unfortunately, they were organized alphabetically, so ours were right next to each other. I could feel his presence hovering beside me as I shoved my gear in. "You really think ignoring me is a good idea, Harris?" he said just loud enough for me to hear. "After all, I heard some rumors that you were going to be partying this weekend. Man, Coach is going to be so—" "Save it, Will." I cut him off, but keeping my tone calm. I didn't want to escalate and have to go back to Shauna with a black eye again. "You can stop. I already quit the team." To my surprise, Will had no snarky replies. In fact, he looked confused. "Wait," another teammate, Al, said, overhearing our conversation. "Harris, you quit?" His voice was loud enough that now everyone had heard the news, and I had regained their attention. I nodded once and refocused on packing up my gear. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. "Dude." Al shoved Will's arm, and in a hushed voice that still carried, said, "He's our best middle linebacker. We can't lose before this game." "We're fine," Will snapped, mouth curled. He narrowed his eyes and took a step closer to me. "What do you think you're playing at, Harris? You think you're going to beg for you to stay? We don't need you." Yeah, we kind of do. Shut up, Al," Will hissed, slamming a fist against a locker with a loud bang. "Screw you, Harris. You know I have college scouts coming to that game." And for the first time I realized that Will genuinely looked nervous beneath the layers of tacked rage. Even after years of friendship with him, I had never seen this kind of vulnerability from him. He'd always played it cool, like nothing bothered him. But seeing him like this, I realized he actually was just a guy. A high school kid not knowing what his future was going to look like. Kind of like me. Maybe he had a scholarship riding on this game. Maybe he had a family member pressuring him to do well. I had no idea. I didn't really know anything about Will Graham. I fiddled with my bag while Will aggressively shoved things around in his locker beside me. Once I figured the team wasn't listening anymore, I tried to calm Will down in a quiet voice. "I'm not leaving until after the next game." He paused, his body still tense. "What?" "I'm playing in the Bobcats game, but I'm not going to stay after that. I'm gone after that." His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he gave a sharp nod. Knowing that was the best I'm going to get from him, I hoisted my bag over my shoulder and headed out. As corny as it was to say, I kind of felt like a new man. I had taken away the power from Will. He had nothing against me. He needed me. I had to tell Shauna. Grabbing my phone, I quickly pressed her contact and waited. After ringing 4 times, I got her voicemail machine and texted her instead. "Hey cutie, got some news." "It's really good news. Really, really good news. Mark, I also kind of miss you." Is that weird to say? I don't care. I'm saying it. That winky face was intentional, by the way. "Hello?" I smiled, shaking my head. Of course, this one time Shauna isn't glued to her phone, spamming me with texts while I was at practice. This was the best I've been feeling while I left practice in a long time. If I only had to make it through a few more practices and one more game, I could make it. Plus, I wouldn't have to go to that stupid family game, which was a bonus. Although Ryder would be disappointed. I knew he loved coming to my football games, and he had been excited to come to that family game, but he would understand, right? I could make it up to him somehow. I wouldn't be able to live with Ryder being upset with me. Suddenly, my phone started buzzing in my pocket, and I quickly answered it with a grin. Finally decided to stop annoying me, huh, loser? Mark. A voice came through the phone that was definitely not Shauna's. I frowned. Mom? Oh, what's up? I'm okay, but you need to come to the hospital. What? Mom, I'll explain once you get here. Why? What's happening? There's been an accident. My knuckles turned white against the steering wheel as I maneuvered the streets throughout, thoughts racing through my head, each more scattered and panicked than the last. Anxiety fought against rationality. I could barely see straight. I forced myself to work through each question one by one. Why was my mom at the hospital? It had to be either my dad or Ryder or both were in an accident. Mom didn't sound hurt, so either she wasn't in the car or she had managed to make it out okay. What happened? Dad was usually a good driver. He drilled road safety into my head harder than any football skill. He was careful. But who knew what other idiots out there were doing, what damage they could have done? Were they okay? Mom was upset, but not hysterical. That's a good sign, right? If one of them was in a coma or something, she'd have been losing it. They must be okay. What if they aren't? I needed to apologize to my father. Things have been so tense between us lately. I still holding the dinner with Shauna over him. It's been affecting all of our interactions. Even though I had been in the wrong, I couldn't let anything happen to him, knowing we were on good terms. That would haunt me for the rest of my life for sure. I needed to fix things between us. And if it was Ryder, I couldn't even think. The hospital came into sight, and I jammed my truck into the first parking spot I could find. The automatic door barely had enough time to open for me as I charged into the emergency waiting area and marched up to the front desk, surprising the secretary. Is there a James Ryder or Harris here? I forced out, my chest heaving. The small secretary with bright blue eyes blinked up at me. I'm sorry, emergency patients who have been admitted aren't registered through the system yet. You can check, but they did come in here. A little boy with brown hair this tall. I held up my hand above the desk. Or a man, maybe. He'd be... I can't answer that. Please! My chest ached. It's my brother or my dad or both. I don't even... Another secretary came over. Sir, we're going to have to ask you to sit down. Someone will... Just tell me if they're okay. I shouted, feeling like something was clawing its way up my throat. Panic, fear, something. Mark. I turned to see my mom standing a few feet away, her face grim. Mom. I rushed towards her, relieved. What's going on? She shared a look with one of the secretaries who must have given her a nod of approval before leading me down the hallway. She wasn't speaking, and it was killing me. Just say it. Deliver the blow. I was ready. Mom, you need to stay calm, Mark, okay? If you get to, they're going to make you leave. I know she was hinting at the fighting. She still thought I was some rage machine and that my emotions took over me and made me lash out. She didn't even know, didn't understand that it hadn't been something else entirely. She hadn't taken the time to see it. I wanted to explain. I wanted her to know that those bloody noses and fists weren't some cure for my boredom on a Friday afternoon, that they saw me. She saw that, and it wasn't who I was. That the scars weren't all physical, that I had been hurting for months and she had been too busy with her own problems to pause and glance at mine. I wanted to yell, but now wasn't the time. We'd stopped outside of a hospital room. I waited, my stomach flipping painfully as my mom slowly turned the knob and stepped inside. I took a deep breath, making sure my face didn't betray my emotions, and I followed her in. The room was off-white and smelled strongly of antiseptic. The fluorescent lights buzzed as the background hum to the constant rhythm, beeping from machines, but my eyes flew immediately to the small figure laying on the bed. My heart fluttered to a stop. That wasn't Ryder. It was Shauna. Chapter 14. I was trapped. I wanted desperately to run, to leave this ugly room behind me, and pretend I hadn't seen what I knew I had. Yet at the same time I wanted to go to her, to make sure it was really her, to see if this was really happening, but my feet were glued to the floor. Shauna, Shauna, Shauna. My sunshine. Mark. The soft voice broke me from my frozen state. It was Jessica, Shauna's mom. I hadn't realized her and Thomas were in the 2 chairs next to the bed, looking worn. This was wrong. Everything was out of place. Today was Wednesday. I was supposed to go over to their house for dinner and family game night. We were supposed to be playing Uno and yelling at each other when he had to pick up cards, laughing and smiling. We weren't supposed to be here. This was wrong. I took one robotic step forward, then another, feeling my heart lurch from each step. Eventually, I had reached the bed, looking down at Shauna's face. She looked okay. A bandage on one cheek and one on her jaw, a little too pale underneath the already pale blue hospital gown. Tubes were hooked up to her nose and an IV was attached to her hand, but the beeping monitor stayed steady. She was okay. I swallowed. What happened? They were driving, Thomas began, his wife reaching over to hold onto his arm. We came to an intersection and the other driver wasn't paying attention. He cleared his throat. He ran the red light and he hit us on the passenger side. Shauna, he cut himself off, blinking hard. I couldn't do anything. My mind immediately conjured up images, scenes from movies, what I wished it hadn't. I gave my head a small shake. How is she? She's all right, Mark, Jessica answered. Really, they have to do some x-rays and things still, but for now she seems to be in all right condition. Mostly some cuts from glass, but they want to keep an eye on her brain activity. She hit her head pretty hard. I sucked in a breath and nodded. Okay. I glanced towards Thomas, looking him over. You're okay, right? Yeah, he said almost shamefully. I'm okay. They did a checkup and everything. Maybe a little whiplash is all. Ty and Evan and Cynthia, I forced out. They were at their grandma's house. They're okay too. Swallowing, I nodded again. That's all that I seem to be able to do. That's good. Jessica's eyes softened in the way that made me look away from them. I stared at the papers taped to the wall, not really reading them, barely seeing them until I felt a hand on my shoulder. We're all okay, Jessica repeated, having come closer. Are you? How did she expect me to answer that? Yeah, yeah. Her arms wrapped me tightly in a motherly hug, comforting but strong. I squeezed her back, knowing she needed it just as much as me. She'll be happy you're here, she promised with a soft smile as she left me go. Her eyes caught something over my shoulder, and her smile faded slowly. Before she moved back to her spot next to her husband, glancing over my shoulder, I remembered my own mom was still watching from the doorway. Her expression was sad and tired, but her eyes looked almost hurt. Telling Mr. and Mrs. Reed that I'd be back, I took my mom into the hallway, closing the door softly behind us. Hey, thanks for calling, I said, leaning against the wall after all this and football practice, I was totally drained. Of course. Mom nodded, tucking some hair behind her ear, glancing around the hallway as a nurse passed us. I was dropping off dinner for Darlene. Remember Darlene? She works here, and I heard them talking about Shauna, and I saw her parents, and I figured you'd want to know. Yeah, definitely. She was quiet for a pause. I'm sorry for not explaining over the phone. I just didn't want you to, to be upset and have to drive. And Mom, it's okay. Thank you. There was another long silence, and I was itching to get back into Shauna's room, but I knew I needed to deal with my mom first. She seemed hesitant and antsy at once. Eventually, she said, "You're really close with them, aren't you?" She knew I was close with Shauna, so I assumed that wasn't the question here. Yeah, I told her. The Reeds have been really good to me. And we haven't? My eyebrows furrowed. What? That's not what But we haven't. She insisted, blinking quickly. She tried to smile, but it was watery one that didn't last so long. You've been looking after yourself for a long time, and we both know it. I didn't know what to say. And it was uncomfortable because my mom was getting emotional and I wasn't sure what to do. And we'd never had that type of relationship where we'd open up to each other, and there was a lot to say, but this wasn't the time or the place to say it. I reached forward and gently squeezed her arm. It's in the past, Mom. Let's move forward. It looked like she wanted to say more, but she nodded instead. Sure. Yeah, okay. She half laughed. Well, yeah, do you need anything, or... I'm good. I promise. I'll see you at home. Okay. She nodded, taking a few steps away. She glanced back over her shoulder, as if she was breaking some mom rule by leaving, and was hesitant to go, but eventually turned and disappeared around the corner. Letting out a long breath, I fell back against the wall again. Geez, I hadn't run enough emotional marathons today already? What else did the universe think it could throw at me? Not wanting to be away from Shauna any longer, I stepped back into the room and found another chair to pull up next to the bed. I shared a look with Thomas and Jessica, and we all seemed to sit in the same understanding. This same care for Shauna, the same worry, the same trap of not being able to do anything. All we could do was wait. And wait we did. I sat in that uncomfortable chair next to Shauna's bed for 3 hours. Nurses moved in and out, checking on her occasionally, pushing buttons on machines. Shauna's parents said they were going stir crazy if they stayed in this room any longer, and decided to go across the street to a coffee shop. Thomas was a bit of a coffee snob, always forcing me to try a new type of bean he'd gotten, or see how smooth this brew is, so he'd been able to stomach the hospital cafeteria coffee and needed something of better quality. They'd offered for me to go with them, but I refused. I couldn't leave Shauna here all by herself. What if she woke up? Or worse, what if she didn't? No. Okay, no, stop that. She's going to be fine. I hugged my head, staring at my hands, fiddling in my lap. My body felt restless. Being unable to do anything was torture. The doctors just kept telling us to wait. They couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything. Nobody could do anything. How in this big whole world was there nobody that could do something to help her? Except Shauna had mentioned something about God a few times. He was somebody who helped people, right? And being, God, he's got to be powerful enough to do something. Closing my eyes I tried to remember how my grandma had prayed before meals. I honestly hadn't been paying much attention before, but now I wished I did, just in case there was special word combinations I was supposed to use. Dear God, I mumbled. Please help Shauna. This Shauna, I mean, you can help other Shaunas if they need it too, but please, really help this one. She's special. And she, needs you. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, sir. God. I mean, amen. I kept my eyes squeezed shut for a long while, hoping all of my might that my message would be heard. I needed Shauna to be okay. After a few more minutes and a few more deep breaths, I lifted my head only to see a pair of brilliant blue eyes blinking back at me. You're such a weenie. I bolted up straight, my face breaking out in a huge grin. Shauna! I grabbed her hand into mine. You're okay. She squeezed my hand back, but I barely felt it was so weak. I held her tighter as her eyes closed again. I'm okay. I'm glad you're here. Of course I am. Her eyelids fluttered open again, though it looked like it was a struggle to do so. Concerned, I shifted towards the end of my chair so I could get a closer look. Shauna, are you feeling all right? Yeah. She nodded, closing her eyes again. I'm going to call the nurse. No, I'm good. Ignoring her, I reached over and pressed the red button next to her bed. A sharp ring could be heard, and a light outside of the room started flashing. Shauna's eyes snapped open at the sound and looked at me in shock. And if I should have actually listened to her protests. Within a minute, a tall nurse, with hair pulled back, rushed into the room, looking at me expectantly. Did you ring your call bell? Is everything all right? She asked, moving the machines to check them. I don't know, I answered, squeezing Shauna's hand again. She doesn't look good. Wow, Mark. Tell me how you really feel, Shauna mumbled. Even in the state she was in, she somehow found the energy to be a sassy little booger. But I couldn't find it in me to laugh, or even give her a smile. The nurse pressed a couple buttons on the machine, reading the information it was giving her, before moving over to Shauna. Does your head hurt? Her voice was gentle, serious. A little, Shauna answered, scowling hard. It feels foggy, almost. Okay. The nurse nodded. She pulled the blanket that Shauna had been using down to her waist, exposing her hospital gown, placing a hand on Shauna's stomach. She put a little pressure. Does that hurt? Shauna shook her head. No. Can I look to see if there's any bruises or swelling going on around the abdomen? I need to lift the gown. The nurse glanced over to me. Realizing what she meant, I quickly stood up. I'll just, step out. I'll call your parents too, Shauna. She barely glanced at me, focused on what the nurse was doing, looking anxious. I closed the door behind me and phoned Thomas, letting him know that Shauna was awake and that the nurse was currently checking up on her. He said they'd be coming right back, and we'd hung up, leaving me waiting again. The toes of my dirty sneakers tapped relentlessly against the tiles next to me. The door burst open, and the nurse who had been seeing Shauna power-walked across the floor without a word. Frowning, I peeked back into the room. Shauna was sitting up now, forehead creased, but her eyes didn't even flicker towards me, too busy staring down at her lap. Hey, what's going? I stopped, my heart jumping into my throat as I got closer. Her right leg was covered in a deep purple bruise that ran the length of her thigh. Shauna, what is that? I asked, trying but failing to keep my voice from shaking. Internal bleeding, I think, she whispered. I couldn't feel it. I didn't know. I latched onto her hand and used the other to tilt her chin toward me. Look at me. You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine, I said firmly to both of us. The nurse came back in with a Dr. Sanders and another man rushing into the room. I stood, but didn't let go of her hand as they examined her. Why were there so many of them? Prep the operating room, Dr. Sanders ordered, and the other guy nodded and left quicker than I could blink. Shauna, are your parents here? He asked calmly. Her eyes were wide. No, they're coming. I jumped in. I called them. Thank you, she whispered, looking up in time for a small drop to roll down her cheek. My stomach clenched painfully. All I could do was squeeze her hand, knowing that any words I tried would come out as awful and nonsensical. I had seen Shauna get teary-eyed at movies or really small dogs before, but I had never seen her cry before. Not like this. And each glistening of moisture in her eyes was like another full, underguarded tackle. Mark, right? Dr. Sanders turned to me. We briefly met earlier when he came to check on Shauna's charts while she was still sleeping. We need to take Shauna down to the OR. We need all the help we can get in her thigh to relieve the pressure and gain access to stop the bleeding, but this needs to be done right away. Words were blurring together and the room suddenly felt like it was starting to tilt, but I understood one thing very clearly. This was critical. Do whatever you need to. The nurse took that as the cue to unlock the wheels on Shauna's bed and start pushing it towards the door. The nurse looked at me. Then Shauna. Mark, I'm right here, I promised Shauna, walking alongside the moving bed, keeping hold of her hand. The last time I had surgery, I was 8, she said quietly. I know. I forced a smile on my face that I hoped looked confident. This will be a breeze compared to that one. Her lips pulled up into a breathtaking smile, her eyes clear and twinkling. My heart lurched to stop before picking up a double time, my stomach fluttering. How someone could still look beautiful in a freaking hospital gown was beyond me, and I didn't give a crap about myself. I coughed out a laugh. Even Dr. Sanders and the nurse were smiling to themselves. Leave it to Shauna, be able to lighten the mood of such a tense situation. She was incredible like that. Well, that's something, I smiled. Shauna! Her parents came rushing down the hallway, catching up with her rolling bed. She tilted her chin as far as she could to see them, her smile lingering. Mom, Dad, hey! I took a step back as they reunited, still feeling unsteady, still feeling like I was about to puke or laugh or cry. I couldn't even tell. My emotions were all over the place and on a spinning wheel, not knowing where the needle was going to land. My heart was pounding from the way she had smiled at me, the way she had cried, the way she had laughed, everything about her. I'm sorry, but we need to get her into surgery now. We can't let anyone past here, the nurse interrupted, Shauna and her parents and myself and my own thoughts. You'll be fine, Jessica whispered, smiling with her teary eyes. We'll be praying for you. Thank you, Shauna muttered, sharing a look with her parents. I had a feeling they'd shared this look before, this look of love, assurance, and comfort. It felt like I was intruding on something until her gaze met mine. My lips parted. Nothing came out. We waited, our eyes held. Something shifted. I'll see you later, she said quietly. Yeah, I muttered, unable to look away. We love you, Shauna, so much, both her parents said as the nurse started to push her away towards the surgery room doors. I love you guys too, she called back. Her eyes swung back to mine for a moment, so clear and like she'd seen something I couldn't. She smiled, and then she was gone. My heart continued to thump in my chest, threatening to break free from it. Come on, Mark. Jessica hooked her arm through mine. Nonsense standing here. We just have to wait a little while longer, and then we'll see her again. I nodded stiffly, trying to understand what I was feeling. This all felt so new. Okay. I followed them to the sitting area, and we were back to those uncomfortable chairs. Waiting. Okay. The little Shauna in my head disappeared and whispered with her smug smile, "Winky face." Smiling to myself, I had to shake my head. I could practically feel her nudging her elbow into my side. All right. Winky face right back, sunshine. Alright, everyone, that is the end of today's episode. I really hope that you guys enjoyed. I just wanted to say good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between. Bye, friends.